Council member Shane McFarland is in charge of our prayer and our pledge.
Okay. If you'll bow your head. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word, and we thank you for what you're doing for us. We thank you for all the things that you've given us in this community. Lord, at this holiday season, be with our families, be with our friends. Lord, I pray for our employees, those service providers that we have on the streets right now who are out protecting us, those who will be working on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. I pray that you give them a special blessing. Thank you for this time. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council meeting, December the 17th, 2009. Council members, I have one announcement before we get into our agenda. Lanny Goodwin has informed us that the U.S. Youth Soccer announces that Murfreesboro, Tennessee is the host of the 2010 U.S. Soccer National President's Cup, which will be the culminating event for the U.S. soccer teams who have advanced from the state to the regional and to the National President's Cup level. And that will be held July the 8th through the 11th at the Richard Siegel Soccer Complex. So congratulations to Murfreesboro Parks and Recreation Department for having that tournament. That means a lot to our city, and we're looking forward to hosting that. Our first item is our consent agenda, and council members, I would like to add on under the consent agenda on item B, we would also like to add that this will also include the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department. They have 16 employees eligible for the one-year longevity program. That will increase that by $960. So I would like to have that. You have the consent agenda in front of you. If there's any items on the consent agenda that you would like to discuss, we can do that at this time. And if not, I will entertain a motion for its approval.
Mr. Vice Mayor, Ms. McGannon, I think that's something.
Would you pull item N at this time?
Item N.
Yes, sir.
Okay, there's been a request to withdraw item N. So we'll include that as well.
Vice Mayor, you going to read the consent agenda too?
Well, I'm not going to read the consent agenda. We'd be here all night. But do you need me to read item N, or just we're okay with that? So just remove item N. That will be withdrawn from the consent agenda, and we'll add that item that I mentioned earlier. So,
Vice Mayor, if there are no other questions or comment, I would move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next is for the approval of the minutes that were held on November the 19th, 2009, and those were hand-delivered. Have any additions or deletions to those minutes? We will entertain that. If not, we will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next, consider for passage on second reading ordinance to annex an area located north of Wilkerson Pike and west of West Park Drive.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next, consider for passage on second reading ordinance to rezone an area located along Greenland Drive and Old Las Casas Road.
Move for passage on second reading. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next, consider for passage on second reading ordinance amending Chapter 15, gas, sections 15-10, 15-12, 15-19, 15-24, and 15-25, dealing with Board of Gas Examiners, licensures, and contractors, and pressure testing certifications.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, we will enter into our public hearings, and we have several of those on our agenda. First is pursuant to Resolution 09-0-R-42, adopted by the City Council on November the 19th, 2009. We are to conduct a public hearing to consider revisions of US 41 Florence Road Sanitary Sewer Assessment District. A notice of the said public hearing was published in the November 29th, 2009 issue of our local newspaper. Mr. Gore, are you going to present that? I will tell the council that we've already had this, I think, presented to us once, and we've already had first reading on it, so we're going to have the public hearing tonight and entertain second reading. Any questions to Mr. Gore before we open the public hearing? I think we're okay, Mr. Gore. Thank you. At this time, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone here wishing to speak for or against this particular item, please come to the podium and give us your name and address. Anyone for or against? If not, I will close the public hearing and consider for passage on second reading an ordinance dealing with US 41 Florence Road Sanitary Sewer Assessment District.
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, pursuant to Resolution 09-0-R-41, adopted by the City Council on November the 19th, 2009. We are to conduct a public hearing to consider amendments to the zoning ordinance, Section 34, Floodplain zoning. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the December 2nd, 2009 issue of our local newspaper. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Vice Mayor and council members. The first public hearing tonight is to consider amending the Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, Section 34, dealing with floodplain zoning. In June of this year, representatives of FEMA visited our community and did what they call a community assessment visit in order to review our city's flood insurance program. After that review, the representatives of FEMA recommended that the city make some changes to our floodplain management regulations in our zoning ordinance. Accordingly, the city's legal department drafted some amendments to this section of our zoning ordinance, which were included in your agenda materials for your review. If the city council decides to adopt these amendments, it will keep Murfreesboro in compliance with FEMA's requirements and will maintain our eligibility in the National Flood Insurance Program. I also placed a copy of the amendments on our city's website and sent an email to local design firms, interested parties, welcoming their participation in the process. I haven't seen anybody opposed to this, and actually the people who have contacted me are in favor of these amendments since it will maintain our eligibility in the National Flood Insurance Program. If you have any questions about the proposed amendments, the city's legal staff and planning staff are available either before or after the public hearing, but the council should conduct a public hearing before considering adoption of these.
Thank you, Ms. Edie. Are there any questions before we open the public hearing from the council? Thank you.
You're welcome.
At this time, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone here wishing to speak for or against this floodplain zoning to please come to the podium and give us your name and address. Anyone for or against? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing at this time. Next, we consider for passage on first reading an ordinance amending the Murfreesboro City Code, Appendix A, zoning, Section 34, pertaining to the floodplain zoning.
So moved.
Have a motion? Your second.
Second.
Motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Young.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next item is pursuant to the Resolution 09-OZ-R-43, adopted by the City Council on November the 19th, 2009. We are to conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 1.12 acres located along Old Las Casas Highway, Rocky Lane, Gunderson Avenue, from residential multifamily 16 RM16 district to commercial local CL district. City of Murfreesboro is the applicant, and a notice of the said public hearing was published in the November the 29th, 2009 issue of our local newspaper. Welcome again, Ms. Ailey.
Thank you. The map before you shows the area which we're considering rezoning, the 1.12 acres in the fuchsia color. That property is located south of Rocky Lane and is bounded by Las Casas Road and also by Gunnarsson Avenue, just north of Greenland Drive. The area shown in orange on the map before you shows the parcel that you considered last month for rezoning from its current RM16 zone to CL, local commercial district. At the Planning Commission public hearing, when we first considered rezoning the orange parcel, a representative of the property owner located on the corner of Rocky Lane and Las Casas Road spoke, and she recommended that the city consider rezoning this entire block all CL, local commercial district, so that this one block would have one consistent zone. Planning Commission heard her comment and recommended that staff continue and consider and study this rezoning request. So before you now is a request to rezone 3 parcels of property, which contain 3 single-family houses and 1 mobile home. The property is currently zoned RM16, as are the properties to the north and west. To the south, along the adjacent southern line, the property is zoned CL, and that's the location of Murfreesboro University bookstore and a gas station. To the east of the property is zoned RS10, and that's a developed single-family subdivision. I did contact the property owners who own these 3 parcels, and they were all in favor of the rezoning because if it were rezoned to CL, local commercial district, the uses that are currently there would continue to be permitted uses. Essentially, it would just open up a larger variety of types of uses that could go there. Currently, as zoned RM16, only residential uses are permitted, single-family and multifamily. But if it were zoned CL, local commercial district, then residential and commercial uses would be permitted. So you have before you this request to rezone the property to CL, local commercial district. It was voted on by the Planning Commission unanimously to approve this request. If you have any questions, either myself or Mr. Ailey will be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
Ms. Ailey?
Yes.
The 3 parcels that border on Greenland Drive directly below this, those parcels there, what are they zoned?
These 2
Yes, ma'am.
in the white are currently zoned CL, local commercial district, and the one in orange is going through the process, and I think was on second reading tonight, past second reading to be rezoned CL. So essentially, the 3 that you're referring to will be zoned CL. 2 already are, and 1 will be.
Is this consistent with what's already out there now, the zoning request tonight with what's already on the?
Yes, sir, it is. It's consistent with the zoning on that block, and actually the majority of the zoning that touches this property is CL, local commercial district, so that wouldn't be an inappropriate zone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions from the council, Ms. Ailey, before we open the public hearing? Thank you. At this time, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone here wishing to speak for or against this, please come to the podium and give us your name and address. Anyone speaking for or against? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. Next, consider for passage on first reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along Old Las Casas Highway, Rocky Lane, Gunnarsson Avenue to commercial local CL district.
Move for approval. Second.
We have a motion and 2 seconds. Any other questions from the council? Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bradford?
Aye. Next item is pursuant to Resolution 09-OZ-R-44, adopted by the City Council on November the 19th, 2009. We are to conduct a public hearing to consider an amendment to approximately 6.96 acres of the planned residential development, PRD, located along Joe B. Jackson Parkway and at Aurora Place portion of the Sunset Ridge planned development. Hastings Family is the applicant. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the November the 29th, 2009 issue of our local paper. Welcome again, Ms. Ailey.
Thank you. The request tonight is to rezone a small portion of the Sunset Ridge Plan development. Actually, it's to amend the PRD zone. If you look at the map before you, the entire area is shaded orange is known as the Sunset Ridge development. The area that's hatched along Joby Jackson Parkway, just north of Joby Jackson Parkway, is the area for which the applicant is requesting a zoning amendment. It's 6.96 acres, and it's the condominium portion, or one of the condominium portions of the development, known as Aurora Place. The applicant has constructed Phase 2 first and will be beginning construction of Phase 1, and essentially most of these changes are to Phase 1. I think during the construction process, they discovered that there were some changes to the plan that would better the plan. However, to make any of those changes, it would have to come before you and get approval by you because it is zoned PRD, Planned Residential District, and so those changes would not be minor. Mr. Paul Cross is here, and after I finish, he's going to stand up and guide you through the proposed changes. Included in your agenda materials is a green book, and this green book outlines the proposed changes that he has to this development. After Mr. Cross explains the projects, the City Council should have a public hearing to consider amending this PRD zone. If you have any questions at any time, I'll be glad to answer them. Mr. Cross?
Are there any questions for Ms. Ely before we let the presentation begin? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Ely. Vice Mayor Bratcher, and members of council, I'm Paul Cross. I reside at 4812 Nina Marie Avenue here in Murfreesboro. As Ms. Ely explained, what we're doing here is we're making a number of small changes which amount to corrections of some mistakes and some things that would help to improve the quality and the circulation in this portion of Sunset Ridge. You may recall that the Hastings family rezoned this entire subdivision and did the initial development, but did not start any construction on the townhome phases. They actually just did the pads and then sold the entire development. The buyer, one buyer bought the townhouse development and certain lots in Everbright Point Section 1, which backs up to the Aurora Place condominiums, and actually built 15 units, 3 5-unit buildings. We had not until 3 months ago done any building on the townhouse site. Because of economic conditions, the person who purchased Aurora Place and built those units went under financially, and the Hastings family took the townhouse section back over. When we started looking at it, we realized that where the owners who had built the first 15 units had built units 32 through 36, there was a problem because this is where it built the townhouse buildings back up to the single-family detached lots. There has to be a landscape buffer between the townhouses and the single-family lots, and there's also a drainage easement on the site plan. They extended the building, that particular building, so far back that it is not possible to get the fence. The landscape buffer was consisted of a privacy fence and a row of trees. It's not possible to get both of those behind that building without encroaching into the drainage easement. So the first request that is part of this package is to amend the landscape plan to remove the trees and allow us to move the privacy fence right to the patios of those existing units. The previous builder did not carry out that part of the project, and we're going to have to do that. Engineering has been out and looked at it, and in conferring with the planning staff, I think they agree that this is a good solution. The second part deals with the buildings that would be to the east of that in both phases. of Sunset Ridge Phase 2 and Phase 1. We're asking the council to allow us to amend the PRD to put in 15 townhouse units that do not have garages. The original plan called for every unit to have a garage. We want to make this change because by so doing, we can move those buildings forward on the site and enable us to get the originally intended buffer of the privacy fence and the trees along the balance of the area that backs up to Everbright Point Section 1. The third request is, if you look at the site plan in the book, you may notice that in Phase 1, by Phase 2, the buildings are divided into groups of 5, and in Phase 1, the original plan still showed the buildings being 10 and 11 unit complexes. We would like to split those up into 5 unit complexes because it makes for better circulation and just an overall better appearance, as opposed to building 10 together. We think having the green space broken up that way and having some in the middle is an improvement over the original design, and we can accomplish that without losing any lots in effect. And it also helps with in the event that we have a fire emergency. It makes getting around the buildings considerably better than what we have now. The fourth change is to correct a problem that we've identified with every townhouse development that we have, and that is that people will not park behind themselves. We put in designed deep driveways that were only 1 car wide, and the result of that has been that people will park 1 car in the driveway and everything else goes in the street. So what we're proposing to do is to change the driveways, make them 2 cars wide, and shorten the depth to 18 feet. We have found that to be very successful in doing that, and the site plan shows single car wide, I think 30-foot deep driveways. We believe this will solve a parking issue that we're facing everywhere where we have the long, narrow driveways. And then on the original, the last request involves the original landscaping plan. It called for privacy fencing to extend all the way down both sides of Ridge Drive. That was an error, a drawing error. Obviously, we didn't intend to have the plantings that we have along Ridge Drive and then box them in by putting a privacy fence up. That is a mistake, and we'd like to have that taken off the plan. We will maintain the privacy fence on the east and west sides of both phases, and in the front, or the part that fronts on Joe B. Jackson, instead of a 6-foot privacy fence, we're going to put in a 3-plank black wooden fence, which will be visible from Joe B. Jackson and will be located behind the landscape berm that follows the front of the property along Joe B. Jackson. And in discussing this with staff, the staff asked that wanted to make sure that there were 3 things that we did. One was to make sure that everybody understood that even though we're going to no garage units, the original PRD requirements for the percentage of brick, for dimensional shingles, and for all of the details that were in the master plan will be maintained. That will be exactly as the other in the original and as the buildings that are there. Also, they asked us to commit to making sure there were windows in the end units and foundation plantings outside the end units, and we're very comfortable with making those changes that staff has asked us to make and committed to doing that.
Councilmember, you've heard the explanation. There's quite a few changes, and I'm sure that's why we're back here in the public hearing stage. Are there any questions concerning any of these changes that was brought to our attention? How many units, I have one question, how many units, how many garages were deleted from the plans? How many units had garages that now that they will not?
There will be 15.
15 total.
They're the ones that, the three remaining buildings that back up to the single-family development, because that's where the drainage easement is, and by, these buildings will be shorter in depth, and that, by moving that forward, it gives us the opportunity to come outside of the drainage easement and get both the fence and the originally planned trees in place.
Okay.
That's the reason for doing it this way.
Any other questions from the council?
May I clarify that his plan shows that 16 of the units will have no garages?
16, okay.
When I count the number there, I counted 16, so I just wanted to make sure, since you asked the question.
We may have one sixplex. I thought they were all fiveplexes, but
That's all of these.
right.
Yeah, there's 16 of those. Okay.
That's right. One of them's a sixplex. My mistake.
That's all right.
I also did want to point out that it was approved unanimously by the Planning Commission, but Chairman Lamb did abstain from voting. So,
How does, how does staff feel? I mean, I haven't had a chance to talk to staff about it, but does the staff feel comfortable with these changes? My biggest concern would be to make sure that we have adequate parking. I think I know he mentioned that earlier, and I just want to make sure and reiterate that we don't get into the situation we've had some of the places in the past where people are parking on the street and not enough room. If they start parking on both sides of the street, maybe for emergency vehicles or whatever.
well, since the Planning Commission felt the plan was acceptable, of course, staff feels it's acceptable. There's some additional parking that's provided in the development that some people can park at. And I did notice that with the single-wide garages or single-wide driveways, you will only have one car parked there. I did go out with a wheel and measure the dimensions of the driveways, and right now the driveways are just a little less than 30 feet long, but then very, very narrow. I'm trying to remember. They were about 8 feet wide, and with those driveways, even though they were 30 feet long, you still did only have that one car parking there. So I think that people use more the driveway.
How many
more often.
vehicles do you think can get in the 18-foot wide driveway? That's, I guess it's 18-foot deep.
Mm-hmm. Typically, it's 20 feet wide for a two-car garage. It would be two cars.
Get two cars. Those two cars would not be, when you park two cars in the driveway, any portion of them be sticking out over the sidewalks or anything like that? Or?
Two cars, no. 4 cars, possibly, yes.
Okay.
Vice Mayor, in our discussions in the Planning Commission, that was one of our concerns was to get the cars off the street. And when they park behind each other, they don't do that. Even though they're supposed to do that, they don't do that.
Right.
So by widening the driveways and moving the cars to the side, I think that'll help eliminate some of the on-street parking, which we want to try to eliminate.
Okay. Any other questions, staff and council?
Looking at some of the pictures, I mean, this is on a sort of a different subject, but when we talk about our parking, and, you know, on some of these, on the one-car garages, I know we've talked in the past that inevitably a one-car garage turns into be a one-car storage unit for whatever. But something I was noticing in the pictures, it seems like that several of the driveways were, you know, had stored their their garbage receptacles on their driveways. And if you store, I think those are 32 by 32 or 32 by 30, but if you store one of those in your driveway, obviously you're limiting your parking. Have we thought about in the future finding ways that on some of these units that we have places provide maybe on the sides of the unit where people can put their trash? Or and I know we run into an issue of people utilizing other people's trash, but something we may want to think about, just looking at some of these pictures, that people are driving around their grills and they're parking their garbage shed that they have in front of their garage. So
I think that's a point well taken. We didn't discuss that with this application. However, when we've had some meetings with potential developers, I know that Ms. Logan, Mr. Alott, and I have discussed that with people proposing new condominium style developments, that actually having a place to put the solid waste container. And I know because sometimes people don't like to keep them in the garage because it is trash. And so we've been researching and looking at different ways to meet that need.
It's probably a little easier to do when you're talking about 2-unit complexes, but when you got a 5 or 6 unit grouping, obviously the ones on the bookends of it, there may be places, but the ones in the middle, there's really nowhere else, is there, to put them in?
Right. You can design maybe like a miniature solid waste enclosure, and that's sort of what we were discussing. So, of course, if it was a large development, they'd be required to use a compactor, so that wouldn't be an issue. But for these smaller ones, we've talked about maybe making like an enclosure or a place. It is easier if you want it to bring it from around behind the building to the front. And, of course, the 2 end units, they're going to do that, but you're not going to have people probably in the middle do that.
No.
And I'm looking at the very last picture that we have in our book, or the next last picture. But the thing that catches my eye is we have the garbage receptacle out in front, and then we have the transformers, the ground transformers, the telephone box, and everything right next to the driveway, which just seems like a nightmare to have something that close to where you're going to be backing in and out and have an electrical transformer and a phone box right there. So I don't know. It's this picture is the one I was looking at with a 6-plex that's on there. But I know that all ties into parking, and if we are shortening the parking lot or shortening the driveway, which I think makes sense, as Mr. Cross has stated about having 2 cars, but if we're in the development plan by shortening those parking lots and then we're taking those up with other items, that seems like that could pose a threat. So something maybe staff to really watch out whenever they go through some of their. I didn't even know you could put a transformer that close to a driveway, but apparently you can.
It's happened. So you want staff to make sure that we consider, when we're looking at these plans, the placement of transformers and utility poles?
Yeah, it seems to me a transformer that close, it looks like it's only 2 feet from the driveway, that could be an issue with someone backing in and out.
Councilman, you raised 2 good questions, and one of those photographs is taken not in the Aurora Place development.
Okay.
One of the problems that we've encountered, and particularly in the development that picture where it was taken, is that you never see the utility plans, because the utility plans are drawn up after the fact.
Correct.
By the utilities. In the case of this one, this particular development is Middle Tennessee Electric, which will be turned over to Murfreesboro Electric. And so when the set of construction plans that we bring for approval by the city do not even show if it's outside the utilities of the city of Murfreesboro, if it's consolidated or if it's Middle Tennessee Electric. Each one of those entities do their own sets of plans, and they go directly to the contractor. The only utility that's reviewed when the construction documents come to the city is the sewer line. So I don't even know until basically the last minute where they're going to put the utilities. If you're dealing with AT&T, they won't cooperate with you in any way at all. They'll show up and come out, and you'll go out there one day and you'll see where they've come in and buried lines wherever they wanted to. In one case, they came in and put them in without an easement and without permission, and when we did our landscape plan, we dug up a 40-pair cable, which they charged us for. So part of that problem with utilities is that the city never gets to review a completed plan that shows all those locations. They get put in place and inspected by the utilities themselves, and it's there before the building gets built. And that's how that transformer wound up so close to that garage. And it is not a good thing. So that's something that I'm sure staff would be happy to work with. The other thing is, relative to the garbage disposal units, the plans for the no garage units that we're going to be bringing to you, we have taken that into account. And our experience has been that some residents will put them in their garages. The picture may have been taken on garbage pickup day, but we've had very good success with people not leaving the garbage cans out in front of their units. But we do have a design that hopefully will solve that problem from a visual point of view.
I agree with what Councilman McFarland is saying. I know there's other issues, like a lot of times you'll see the water meter boxes in the middle of the driveways and things like that that could sometime down the road, if you have a leak, require a homeowner or utility to dig up someone's concrete driveway, and that's always an issue as well. I don't know, just thinking, I don't know if there's ever a chance to come in through with all these utilities through the rear, where you would have all those different boxes and all those homes being served on the rear of those units instead of on the front side. That may be an issue. I don't know. Ron likes that idea.
No, I don't.
Anyway, any other questions before we open the public hearing? Thank you. At this time, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone here wishing to speak for or against these changes in this development to please come to the podium, give us your comments and your name and address. Anyone wishing to speak for or against? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. Next, consider for passage on first read an ordinance to amend 6.96 acres of the Aurora Place portion of the Sunset Ridge PRD located along Joe B. Jackson Parkway.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next item is pursuant to Resolution 09-OZ-R-45 adopted by the City Council on November the 19th, 2009. We are to conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 2.92 acres located along Veterans Parkway and Franklin Road from Planned Commercial Development, PCD District, to Commercial Fringe, CF District. The City of Murfreesboro is the applicant, and the notice of the said public hearing was published in the November 29, 2009 issue of our local paper. Ms. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you again. The subject property is located on the northwestern corner of Franklin Road, or Highway 96, and Veterans Parkway, which used to be known as Beasley Road. The request is to rezone the property from PCD, Planned Commercial District, to CF, Fringe Commercial District. I'd like to clarify that initially, when the Planning Commission first considered this item and had a public hearing, it was advertised as being rezoned from PCD to CH, Highway Commercial District. After the public hearing, the Planning Commission decided that the more appropriate zone would be CF, so what you have before you tonight is to consider zoning this property CF, not CH. The property does consist of 4 parcels with 3 single-family houses on it. It's contiguous with city limits on the southeastern side, and the properties to the southeast are zoned RS-15 for single-family residential purposes. The closest city parcel is the future location of Family Worship Center, which is a church, and then further to the east are some undeveloped properties. The area that's white on the board before you is the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. You may look at this property and realize that, or it may be familiar to you, and that's because earlier this year the City Council reviewed this property and considered annexing it and zoning it PCD simultaneous with the annexation. At that time, the applicant submitted a pattern book which was very vague in content. It merely listed a list of uses that would be permitted on this property, and it attached to that list a guarantee to meeting the GDO Gateway Design Overlay standards and going through the review process. Upon further consideration, our city's legal staff has advised planning staff that that's not really an appropriate zone, the PCD zone, that our zoning ordinance would like a more specific plan, so that vague pattern book doesn't accomplish what our zoning ordinance outlines as a PCD development. So staff is bringing this back to you, since it's not appropriate for it to be zoned plan development because of its vagueness, to be zoned CF. It is located on a highway and a major road that has access to 840, so we do feel comfortable with allowing a commercial use or a commercial zone on this property. I think that there was some discussion with the Planning Commission that since in the past several years, Planning Commission has become more comfortable with the design of, or reviewing site plans, and actually the planning staff are preparing some amendments to our site plan review process, which would add some additional standards to apply to all of the city of Murfreesboro, not just those additional standards that are on the gateway. They're not as meticulous as is required in the gateway, but they would require planning as far as lighting fixtures and those sorts of things and foundation plantings. We're still working on that, still working on bringing that to you, but Planning Commission felt comfortable knowing that there were some amendments in the future to our site plan review process which would enhance the review process, and comfortable zoning this property CF French Commercial District. If you have any questions about the process or the previous application, I'll be glad to answer them either before or after the public hearing, but you should consider, or you should have a public hearing to consider zoning this property to CF French Commercial.
Thank you. Any questions to Ms. Haley before we open the public hearing? Thank you.
Sure.
At this time, I will open the public hearing and ask if there's anyone here wishing to speak for or against this particular item. Please come to the podium, give us your name and address. Anyone for or against? If seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Consider for passage on first reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along Veterans Parkway and Franklin Road to Commercial Fringe CF District.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Our last public hearing is pursuant to Resolution 09-OZ-R-46, adopted by the City Council on November the 19th, 2009. We are to conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 6.78 acres located south of Highway 99 and west of St. Andrews Drive from single-family residential 15 RS-15 district to commercial fringe CF district. City of Murfreesboro is the applicant. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the November the 29th, 2009 issue of our local paper. Ms. Silly?
Thank you again. This request is to rezone a portion of two parcels located south of Highway 99, or New Salem Road, and west of St. Andrews Drive. The property is shaded, or the requested area is shaded orange on the map before you. I'd also like to clarify that initially when the Planning Commission studied this property and considered it for rezoning on November 4th, it was advertised as being zoned from RS-15 to CH, Highway Commercial District. At the public hearing, the Planning Commission decided that the more appropriate commercial zone would be CF, and that's the recommendation to you tonight, is to consider zoning this property to CF, French Commercial District. Planning Commission thought that CF was a more appropriate zone because adjacent to the north is an area that's zoned CF as well. It's the location of a future public store and the current location of a veterinary clinic. To the east of the property is zoned PUD, and that's a mixed-use development. To the south, the remainder of the property is zoned R15, and just south of that is zoned for single-family purposes and is a developed single-family subdivision in the city. And to the northwest is the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. The Salem Pike Land Use Plan recommends that the area we're studying would be best suited if it were used commercially, as a commercial node. This property probably, again, looks familiar to you because a couple months ago we brought before you and you considered rezoning the property to PCD, Planned Commercial District. However, before the third and final reading for this property, the city's legal staff pulled it off the agenda because they had the same concerns with this property as we did with the previous agenda item. The pattern book that was submitted for this PCD zone was vague, and it only listed permitted uses, and also it made a commitment to meet the GDO standards and go through the review process. However, that's not appropriate for how our zoning ordinance defines a planned commercial district zone. So with that being withdrawn, the request before you today is to zone the property CF similar to the properties that are across Highway 99. If you have any questions about this, either before or after the public hearing, I'll be glad to answer them for you.
Are there any questions to Ms. Seeley before we open the public hearing? Thank you. Sure. I would like to just inform the council that my place where I work, employment, we have this property listed. I do not have any interest in it whatsoever. So just want to let you be aware of that. Seeing no questions, thank you. At this time, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone here wishing to speak for or against this item, please come to the podium and give us your name and address. Anyone for or against? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing at this time and consider for passage on first reading an ordinance to rezone an area located south of Highway 99 and west of St. Andrews Drive to Commercial Fringe CF District.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next, consider recommendations of our golf director with regards to the loyalty card program at Old Fort Golf Club. You have a copy attached. Welcome, Mr. Wilkins.
Good evening, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Before you tonight, recommendation from staff and approval from the Golf Commission is the proposed implementation of a golf loyalty program at the golf course. The information you have in front of you hopefully will break that down. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those in just a moment. But upon reviewing different types of programs and items that were available to us, we felt like this would be a good one for us, not only to promote play at the facility, but also rewarding the players that use our facility the most often. It is a program where cards will be sold at $10 each, and upon accumulation of points, you'll be able to redeem those for either a round of golf in the future, and points are accumulated through the use of golf or carts or pool carts. It also gives you the ability to use a practice facility at a reduced rate of $1 off per bucket of balls, and also to be able to purchase through the golf shop at a 10% discount off of what our normal rate would be off of any items that we have in the shop or any special order items. This would not be applicable to anything that was on sale. But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to address them at this time. It is a program where the card is good for 1 year from the date of purchase. It will be a program that we would have to commit to for at least 2 years because of the timing of being able to sell the cards all year long. So it'd be something that we would be evaluating, obviously, at close to the end of the first year to see where we stood. Be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions from the council concerning this program? Is this only going to be at Old Fort Park, not any other facility, not the VA or anything? That's right.
We, our last time we had an update with our point of sale software, it does have on it the capability of hosting this program already, so there wouldn't be an expense there. There would be the expense, obviously, of the cards, which would be somewhere around $1 to $1.15, and also purchase of a webcam, which would be somewhere between $50 and $70 to be able to tie a picture in with the program of the person that's using it, because the card will only be able to be used for the person that purchased the card.
Any questions concerning this program? Not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move that we approve the recommendation.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins.
Thank you.
Good luck. Next is consider recommendations of the city engineer with regards to a contract for construction of the Matson Pike, Fortress Boulevard, Grisham Lane realignment. You have a copy of that attached. Welcome, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Bratcher. I do have one item for you tonight. 13 bids were received on December 1st, 2009 for the construction of the realignment of Matson Pike, Fortress Boulevard, and Gresham Lane. Construction plans for this project were developed after an extensive traffic study was completed in late 2008 for the intersections of Matson Pike, Fortress Boulevard, and Matson Pike, Gresham Lane. We've seen a significant increase in traffic or increase in the traffic growth as in this area as development has continued to occur. And we've also had problems with the intersection's proximity to the interchange at Medical Center Parkway and I-24. We've included a site map which shows the general layout of the newly formed intersection. We note that the next phase of the project will continue with the rebuilding of Fortress Boulevard to a 5-lane section to Blaze Drive, and that is currently being finalized and should be advertised for construction in the first quarter of 2010. A low total bid in the amount of $6,399,774.65 was submitted by Charles DeWeese Construction of Franklin, Kentucky. Might note that our original estimate for the project back just a year ago was $9 million. Charles DeWeese Construction has completed many large-scale projects for utility districts and municipalities, primarily in the southern Kentucky area. They have also completed work on several larger residential developments in the Murfreesboro area. Staff and our consultant, SEC Incorporated, have reviewed the qualifications and also contacted references for Charles DeWeese Construction and are satisfied they are capable of completing this project within the specified contract time. SEC has provided a tabulation of the bids and a letter of recommendation, which is also attached with your package. We recommend award of the contract to Charles DeWeese Construction, subject to review and approval of the agreement by the city attorney with funding from the TML loan. We also note that per a previously approved agreement with Consolidated Utility District, they will be responsible for about $800,000 of the above-mentioned bid amount. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions to Mr. Griffith concerning this road project? What's your time frame, Mr. Griffith?
We're looking at a 2-year completion. The next section, which should be bid, as I mentioned, the first of next year, is a little bit smaller. It's about 1.5 years, so they should all be completed right around the same time within a couple of years.
Is the construction of both phases going to be going on at the same time, or are they going to be?
Yeah, no, they'll be going on at the same time. Luckily, we've found with widening these roads from a 3-lane to a 5-lane section, we're able to keep traffic moving much more easily. I think we noticed that with the DeJarnett Lane and with some of our other 3 to 5 lane projects in the area. And we've designed this particular construction project to build most of it off alignment, if you will, off the existing road, and then we're just making connections to the existing roads just at the last.
So traffic interruption will be at a minimum to a certain point?
Yes, exactly. I live out in this area, and I personally saw to that design.
As far as right-of-ways goes, there was no right-of-ways purchased, or was it all existed, or what's the story on that?
Most of that was actually donated by local landowners. Matter of fact, our last count, more than $4 million in land was donated for the project by several of the local large landowners. All that has been finalized. We do have an easement that's been finalized with one or two other developments, but I'd say 99% of the property's been acquired.
Okay. Any other questions to Mr. Grisham? What are your wishes?
Move for approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Dilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. I know this is going to be a well-needed project with that road having that bottleneck as you come across the interstate. That'll take care of that and maybe keep traffic moving a lot smoother. Thank you. Next, consider recommendations of our Chief of Police that A is request for funding for the renovation of the old Fleet Service Building. You have a copy of that attached. Welcome, Chief Crispin.
Vice Mayor, good evening. Members of council, pleasure to be with you tonight. We have those two items that you've described. Most of you, I'm sure all of you, are familiar with the old Fleet Services Building on Industrial Drive. As we worked toward the design of the police precinct in recent years, one of the things that we attempted to do was to use some existing city properties to help us trim, if you will, the size of the precinct design and hopefully reuse some of the vacant space in the city to address those needs. What we're asking for tonight is for you to approve the funding of $500,000 for the renovation of that building, which once completed, if it's approved, would house two of our operational sections there. You may recall that the front half of that building is configured as office space. That would lend itself well to one of the needs that we have. And in one of these applications, we are currently utilizing leased space. That lease will expire in the early to mid part of 2010. And so we're moving to try to have this space renovated so that operations will be able to move into that facility at that time. You may also recall that the back part of that building, which is where Fleet Services formerly was, has some large bays, which will serve well the other need that we have for that space. It also has a significant area to the rear of that building that is already fenced and will serve us well for the storage of vehicles and so forth and so on. And we believe that would be a good usage. In addition, there's a good deal of attached green space that's right around this building that we've gone ahead and actually utilized for some of our canine needs in the meantime. This amount that's requested does include the renovation of the building itself based around what we believe the needs are and as they have been designed by Johnson & Bailey Architects, who's done the professional work for us there. It does include the professional services, architectural engineering costs that Johnson & Bailey will have associated with the renovation of this building and these premises. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions to the Chief concerning this issue?
I don't have any questions, but Chief, I'll get with you on get your plans about security out there where that building is. I don't want to do that on public. We'll talk on the phone.
I appreciate that very much. One thing, Mr. Vice Mayor, I did not mention that's in your materials. If approved, this funding would come from unforeseen and then be refunded upon the future sale of municipal bonds, which obviously is the second half of this. But
Correct.
I want to make sure that's clear.
Any questions?
How many square feet is that building?
You've asked me a question I can't answer. I know in the back there are about 3 or 4 large work bays. One of those bays actually has a paint bay that's included with it. I would guesstimate, Mr. McFarland, probably something in the range of 3,000 square feet up front. And there is an upstairs area that we anticipate renovating into office space as well. And don't hold me to that. I'm guesstimating, but I'd say that's in the ballpark.
Well, you're talking about the entire building. I mean, it's probably 50,000 square feet. I mean, it's big. It has several mezzanines in the building. I've been in the building and looked at it.
It's good size.
It's a good sized building. That was just a pure guess, but it's quite big.
And the largest part of that space in the rear, Mr. Bratcher, that you're talking about where the bays are, obviously we'll have large vehicles that will be stored there, and that'll give us some weather protection for those vehicles as well as other things.
Mr. Gilley?
Mr. Lyons, as far as the funding is concerned, what's the turnaround on being able to replenish unforeseen from the refunding to the sale of bonds? This is a fairly good chunk of unforeseen that's being spoken for, so to speak.
Sure. We understand. Because the budget's tight, we're trying to do our best to hold off on our next borrowing. But we would expect we'd have a borrowing in 2010, probably mid-year.
Do you feel comfortable doing this is going to leave us enough in unforeseen to get by? Vice Mayor, if there are no other questions, I move we approve the recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Thank you,
very
Chief.
much.
We appreciate that. Second part of that is consider for adoption of Resolution 09-R-31, expressing official intent to reimburse for certain expenditures in connection with the renovation of 906 Industrial Drive. That is the former Fleet Service building that we just discussed.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next, consider adoption of a new employee handbook, Section 5003, and salary adjustments for certain Murfreesboro Police Department detectives. Mr. Lyons.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Bratcher and members of council. What we have before you this evening is a new section for the employee handbook dealing with our classification and compensation plan. In particular, it talks about salary supplements. This is something that the city has for several employees like our EMTs, our detectives, our information officers. And as we've gained experience with the city's new pay plan and the use of these salary supplements, sometimes called stipends, we've realized that some clarification is in order. You may recall we've had a situation with some of our police detectives that was corrected in 2008 dealing with pay related to the stipends. So what we felt was in order was to bring you a policy that will, once and for all, we hope, answer the questions related to the salary supplements. And so Ms. McGannon has worked hard to draft something for your consideration. The policy that's before you will state that the salary supplements are just that. They are supplements that recognize duties that an employee is performing for the city, but that those duties don't represent a promotion when received, nor a demotion should they be taken away. Secondly, the salary supplement is not factored into promotional decisions. We're going to use an employee's base pay to make decisions about promotions. Again, we feel like this will help let our employees, our department heads, understand how the plan is to be implemented. Should you find this policy with your approval, we will have a second piece of this that will deal with 11 detectives and a mid-year pay adjustment. So Perhaps at this point, I'd like to see if you have any questions on the handbook section. Ms. McGannon has indicated that on page 4, item G has a error in the third line where it says the word market. That should be changed to the word mid. Be happy to answer any questions about the policy, and then I'll like to address the police detective.
Okay. Are there any questions concerning the employee handbook, and with exception of the one correction that was pointed out? Do you want a separate motion on those? Is that what?
You don't need to move on the correction. It would just be a motion whether you wish to adopt the policy.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion second for the adoption of the employee handbook, section 5003. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
As I mentioned, that stipend that was provided the detectives led to us to make probably an unfair interpretation that dealt with employees who would receive the stipend and the time the budget year that they were to sit out and not receive a pay increase. The city's policy for a very long time has been that once an employee receives a promotion, they need to sit out one full budget year before they would receive a additional step increase. In the case of our detectives, there were 11 of them that did not receive a pay increase because we looked at that $2,600 as a pay increase. Because looking back in hindsight and looking at the record, when we established the pay differential or the $2,600 salary supplement, we did so to create a dual career track for police officers and detectives. So because we set this pay plan up with that dual career track, we feel like it would be more fair to address this issue for those 11 employees. The proposed cost of this one-time adjustment mid-year is $7,921.29. The list of employees who are included are in your packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions to Mr. Lyons about this adjustment? What are your wishes?
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, City Council, we're wanting to schedule a meeting with our state legislative delegation, and I think, Mr. Robbs, Mr. Lyons, you're going to present that.
Yes, sir. We would like to have a session with the state legislative delegation as they get ready to head into session for 2010. We'd like the opportunity to sit down and talk to them about legislative issues, talk to them about road projects and funding, things that will be important to the city of Murfreesboro. The delegation is actually going to be in town that day, and although my packet to you suggests a meeting time of 11:30, I would like to amend that and ask to see if we could meet at 9 a.m. Here at City Hall in room 218. They'll be having a breakfast meeting at MTSU that day and a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce leadership at 11:30. So if we could, we'd like to change that time to 9 a.m.
So that 9 a.m. in room 218, is that going? It's not going to be with all the municipalities, just us?
That will be just Murfreesboro, yes, sir.
Okay. I like that better. So. All right. Is that just we don't need to?
Well, we'll need to advertise that meeting, so if we could get a
Okay. Need a motion on that? Okay.
So
Council
moved.
members.
Second.
Motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next item is consider for passage on first reading in Ordinance 09-0-47, amending the Murfreesboro City Code, Chapter 29, subdivisions, plats, and maps, Section 29-5, dealing with fees for site plans and preliminary subdivision plats.
Vice Mayor Bratcher, this is an ordinance that would return the text of the city code to the language regarding fees for site plan review and preliminary subdivision plat review from $500 to $300. That change was made in 2008, but through inadvertence was not implemented. After that was recognized, staff discussed whether this would be an appropriate time for the adopted language to be followed, and due to the economic circumstances that everyone is familiar with, our development community is facing, staff is recommending to you that ordinance not be followed, but instead it be changed to return it to the fee level that existed in 2008. The fees were increased in 2008 because of the increased burden to staff to review for stormwater plans. I think the members of the council are well aware how extensive that is. So it's not any sense that the fees were unjustified, just that the timing is bad. But we do need to take this measure to change it back and to ask you to adopt clearly that those won't be applied to any plans that have come in during that interim. We don't want there to be any doubt that they had any money due the city. We want to make clear that that is being waived.
Okay. Any questions to Ms. McGannon concerning this? I'll entertain a motion.
Move for adoption.
Second.
Motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, consider for adoption Resolution 09-R-30, amended the 2008-2009 budget.
Mayor and council, this is a housekeeping matter we do each year as we wind up the preparation for the audit report to be issued. We come across some funds where we have overspent the original budget. These are all items that you were aware of as we went along, but we wait and do one big amendment at the end. So this is what we have found this year that needs to be amended.
Okay. Are there any questions to Ms. Wright concerning these amendments?
Vice Mayor, I move that we adopt the resolution as presented.
Do I hear a second?
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, we will consider any beer permit applications. Ms. Wright?
We have two tonight. One is a change of ownership and name change for a restaurant at 2069 Las Casas Pike, and another for a new location at 1875 Memorial Boulevard. They have met our background and code inspection requirements.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, we are to consider the payment of the statements, and we have a new list that's been on your desk tonight. I'll give you a second to look that over.
Pay the bills.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to pay the statements. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye. Next, we have any board or commission appointments, and we have one. It's the City Hall Art Committee. The recommendation is for Charles Clary to fill that spot on that City Hall Art Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Next, is any other business come from the staff or the city council? I think, Mr. Lyons, you have
Yes.
some announcements. You
Yes.
have a new employee, or?
Yes, sir. Wanted to introduce Ms. Nellie Patton. Come forward. Ms. Patton has joined the city as of Monday. She is going to serve as our Assistant Transportation Director. I don't think anybody in the building is happier to have a new employee more than Mr. Richardson. He has worked long and hard and is very much looking forward to Ms. Patton. She brings to us 33 years of experience with TDOT, especially in the transit area. So as Mr. Richardson helps with Rover, Ms. Patton is going to be a great asset to the city. We welcome her aboard and glad she's with us.
Here, here.
Welcome, Ms. Patton.
Thank you for coming.
We're excited you're here. Keep Mr. Richardson moving. Other business, Ms. McGannon.
Two matters, Vice Mayor Bratcher. The first is Resolution 09-R32 that was put on your table, and that seeks to set aside the right to refund the expenditure you approved with the consent agenda for the fire department to get a new 75-foot aerial truck, and this amount of $750,000, we believe, was the budgeted amount, will not all be spent on the truck, which is what you authorized, but allows for the subsequent equipping of it. So it's asking you to go ahead and approve that funding mechanism for the purchase previously approved.
Any questions, Ms. McGannon, regarding this resolution for the 75-foot aerial truck?
Move for adoption of the resolution.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Ms. McGannon, have another item?
I do, thank you. Also, before you, on your table tonight, and emailed to you earlier in the day, is a matter that the staff became aware of late yesterday afternoon, which called us to look at our existing city ordinances with regard to beer permits. We have a local business that is renovating the old Johnson Controls facility to be a bowling and amusement venue. It's a large building, and they are going to have lots of activities there. The construction is currently underway, and they're hoping to be open for business next month, January. The amount of space that they have dedicated in their plans for activities, for amusements and video and game rooms would be in conflict with the language that we Council adopted in 2000, amending Section 4-46B of the City Code, which prohibits beer permits being issued to certain businesses which might be attended by young people, and which allows a very severe limitation on game rooms as less than 2% if it is not the principal business. The applicants for the beer permit, the Patricks, are here if you have any specific questions. But the issue that the review led the staff to bring to you as a matter of other business tonight is to encourage the council to consider whether or not sections 446B and C of the city code are really the most appropriate way for the council to exercise its discretion and jurisdiction over beer permits. As you saw from looking at the section of 446 that I sent you, each time the council decides that it's going to grant a beer license to a new venue, it is going through the criteria that are in 446A, including traffic congestion, interference with schools, churches, or other places of public gathering, or otherwise interfere with, injure, or adversely affect public health, safety, and morals, and it goes on at considerable length. I won't take the council's time to read all of that, but if you look at the second page, there are a great variety of factors which the council can consider in deciding whether or not to issue a beer permit. As you know, you have lots of jurisdiction. Because of the flexibility that you have there and the fact that we have adults, not just youth, playing games, it seemed that the restrictions we currently have might be too restrictive, as shown by the impact they would have on this local business currently under development. So the suggestion to you in the form of an ordinance, which could be considered on first reading tonight if the council wished to do so. Obviously, as with any ordinance, subsequent changes could occur before second or third reading, but the proposal would be to repeal sections B and C, adding to the factors under subsection A that you can consider the presence of drivers of vehicles who are not of lawful drinking age, because there is some concern, particularly about youth who might be old enough to get a driver's license, but not old enough to drink, that would be a factor you could consider in applications for beer licenses, whether that was going to be a particular risk at a location. So that, in essence, is what led to us bringing the matter to you at all and bringing it to you on first reading tonight without it having been in your packet because of the schedule for the business and the council meeting schedule. And staff would be happy to answer your questions.
Are there any questions to Ms. McGannon concerning this request? Basically, it allows for 2%, which would be, at this instance, would be, what, 1,100 square feet?
Yes.
Basically, someone they would be fine, we wouldn't be here
We have had...
with 1,100 square feet, but if they wanted 2,000 square feet, then we have a problem.
Right. There is a problem because they are planning to have bumper cars, and there's some question whether or not the way we've got the ordinance written for go-karts would apply to bumper cars, but the primary concern is the percentage being so limited to 2%. And there are, I understand, I haven't been myself, venues in Nashville and other locations that primarily are geared towards adults who wish to eat and drink a variety of beverages with video and other arcade and amusement games. We would not be able to have businesses like that here. Similarly, Williamson County, there's a movie theater where you can get a beer or wine or something at the movie, and that's been successful without impugning their youth. We wouldn't be able to have a special venue like that. So the question would be whether or not the council wishes to consider whether it would have sufficient control and businesses would have more flexibility to let the market determine what kind of audience they wanted.
Well, this basically controls how much they're having, how many square feet they're having. It's not a question of could they do it if they met the specifications. Is that right?
For this particular business, but the language of the ordinance that we currently have totally prohibits any business that is a theme park, a skateboard park, an ice skating rink, a water feature, a public pool, or a theater. They totally, regardless of percentage, cannot get a beer permit. So there's an absolute prohibition for certain businesses. There is a limitation to the 2% percentage. In other words, a business such as, in this example, bowling, that is primarily something else, could have a less than 2% amusement or game room, but if it was totally amusement or games like the Dave & Buster's that I was describing earlier, they would not be able to get a beer permit. So they couldn't come. So there are two things that the ordinance currently does. The issue which brings us to the consideration on this short timeline was the percentage. But when staff was looking at the issue and talking about the different kinds of businesses people might want to open in Murfreesboro and that might be appropriate, it seemed that rather than a blanket total prohibition, it might give businesses more option and the council sufficient ability to protect children and youth by deleting the total prohibition.
But the primary use of this facility is a bowling alley, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And it would limit, excuse me? Well, but the majority of the building is for the bowling alley use. But this would prevent, what you're saying is, we, in Murfreesboro today, we couldn't have a Dave and Buster's, basically.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this question, Ms. McGinn. An existing business, there's a laser tag place here in Murfreesboro that caters to juveniles, although I know adults go there as well. There's a skating rink that I guess caters to juveniles. It certainly doesn't cater to me. Would existing businesses like that have options for sale of alcohol that they don't have today?
Sale of beer, not alcohol.
Okay,
beer.
just beer. But
Yeah.
they would then have the options.
They could come to the council and apply. The council, considering all the factors that are there, which I know you don't verbalize routinely, but you have that power, and I'm sure you make that kind of analysis when the issue comes to you. They could apply, and you would have the right to say whether you thought it was appropriate or inappropriate.
And our legal standing would be as strong then as it is with the current regs.
Well, you know, I believe we're in the KISS principle, keep it simple. Now, total prohibition is a lot simple for your lawyers than applying discretion, but we stand strongly behind the council's ability and right to exercise its discretion and judgment on a question about suitability.
I thought you were a believer in belt and suspenders, Ms. McGinn.
I believe in many things, Mr. Edwards.
Well, another option we have would be, instead of having total prohibition, would be we could change the percentage.
Yes.
And that would, I mean, in an instance like you had just described, any percentage would eliminate that, basically.
The skating rink would have no opportunity to apply
Right.
for a beer permit, as opposed to if it was repealed, they could decide, well, we want beer and we want to put it off in a small corner, or, you know, we're going to turn it into a dominant revenue generator.
I was just going to say, as we're talking about cliches, that we talk about belt and suspenders and splitting the baby, what's that thing, splitting the...
Cut the baby in half.
Yeah, absolutely. All these legal jargons, I'm trying to say, I'm sure we can use some common sense and say that a laser tag place that we frequent, and I know the point you're bringing up, that, you know, it's predominantly, anytime I've been in there, it's, although there are adults in there playing with their kids, it's all kids. In a bowling alley, I've not ever been to a bowling alley that they don't serve beer. So I think if we put a percentage on it, in this instance, where you have a 50,000 square foot building, you seem like you're limiting yourself by putting a percentage on it, because you're saying in a 10,000 square foot out of that 50,000 square feet, if we said 20%, that's it. So, you know, the Dave & Buster's I've been to in Nashville and Atlanta, it's 30,000 square feet probably. And so it seems like can we just do what you're saying and use our discretion on saying, well, that makes sense, no, this doesn't make sense?
I think that's a recommendation that you're making, as opposed to looking at it on a blinder with percentages of footage, square footage. You're saying that we use your recommendation to be able to look at it on a case-by-case basis, given a list of criteria that we have, and exercise our own discretion based upon the use of the facility and its patrons.
Right. The criteria that are there, I think, give you authority to exercise discretion. As with any time you have it, there would have to be a rational basis for it. It couldn't be this laser tag places owned by local people, that laser tag people are owned by people from Smyrna, so one gets a beer permit, the other doesn't. That might have a problem with the courts. But if it were something that, there was a traffic problem, it was very near a high school, the things that are there, I think you would be safe in saying, but it would call for the exercise and expression of a rational basis.
And you're not aware of any similar situation or similar type of ordinance that's been challenged?
People who get denied beer permits tend to sue. I can't say that there
Sure.
are
Well,
other
I'm
cases.
sure there have been challenges, but are you aware of any appellate precedents that says that you can't have a discretionary ordinance that you're recommending?
I'm not.
Okay.
As you saw from the letter, this came up very rapidly. I will seek to do some more research, should you adopt it on first reading, before second and third, so I can give the council and Ms. Wright, who has special responsibilities with regard to beer permits, some more guidance on those factors.
I think what you recommended is very reasonable, and it's looking at a specific instance that's come up pretty quick that we can be proactive about. So with that, I move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other comments or questions before we call the roll? Call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bratcher?
Aye. Any other business? We won't meet anymore, I don't think, before Christmas, will we? This is it, isn't it? I know on behalf of Mayor Bragg and the council, we want to wish everyone, our employees, our staff, and our citizens in Murfreesboro a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We're adjourned.